People often say that money changes people, but the truth is, it only reveals who they really are. My name is David Lawson, and I am, or at least I was, one of the richest men in Africa. My life looked perfect from the outside. I owned 3 companies, cars, 2 private jets, and several estates across the continent. But what I didn't have was peace. My wife, Clara, was beautiful, the kind of woman whose presence could silence a room. I met her at a charity event 7 years ago. She smiled at me like she had known me forever, and I was swept off my feet. Within a few months, we got married, but over the years, that charming woman I fell in love with had changed, or maybe she had only removed her marks. Clara never worked a day in her life after marriage. I didn't mind at first. I wanted her to enjoy life. But what I didn't know was that I had also invited her mother, Rose, into my home for good. Rose was loud, bossy, and never satisfied. They acted like queens in a palace, and I was the king they didn't respect. Every week, they sacked and replaced the domestic staff. Most were dismissed without pay. I once overheard my cook crying quietly in the servants' quarters. "Madam didn't let me eat anything today, even after I finished cooking," she whispered to the cleaner. "And I've been here since around 4 a.m. It broke my heart. Clara and her mother spent my money like it was falling from the sky. Designer clothes, expensive perfumes, diamonds, jewelries. They even brought a pure gold toilet seat for the guest bathroom. I'm not joking. When I complained, Clara said, "What's the point of being rich if I can't live like royalty?" I began to wonder, what if I lost everything tomorrow? Would they still love me, or would they throw me away like trash? That thought stayed with me. I couldn't shake it off. I had given them everything, comfort, luxury, and the kind of life people only see in movies, and yet I was treated like an outsider in my own house. No respect, no kindness, and no warmth. One night, I sat alone in my study. The chandelier above me sparkled like the stars, but my heart felt empty. What if all this is fake? I whispered to myself. What if I've married wrong? And then it came to me, a plan, a dangerous one, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to see how deep their love really went. So I called my lawyer and my most trusted employee, Frank. He was like a brother to me. I told them my plan: to fake an accident, lose my company shares in a stage fraud investigation, freeze my bank accounts, and act as if I became crippled in the process. Frank stared at me. "Are you sure, sir? This is serious." "I need to know, Frank," I said, my voice low. "Before I die, I need to know who really loves me." Frank nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it," he said. "I'll make the arrangements." The setup began. 3 weeks later, I made my move. That morning, Clara and Rose were at the hospital for Rose's routine checkup. While they waited at the reception, sipping fruit juice and gossiping, I made the emergency call. 10 minutes later, a nurse rushed into the waiting area. "Are you the wife of Mr. David Lawson?" the nurse asked with so much agitation. Clara stood up immediately. "Yes, what happened?" "There's been a serious accident," the nurse said. "Please come with me." Clara froze. Her hands began to tremble. Rose let out a sharp scream. "Accident? What kind of accident?" They were rushed into the emergency room, and there I was, lying on a hospital bed with blood smeared on my bandaged forehead, my legs strapped, a neck brace holding my head up, and tubes running from both arms. I looked broken, almost lifeless. Clara screamed, "David! Oh my God, David!" Rose fell to her knees and began to wail. "No, God forbid! Who did this to my son-in-law?" The nurses held them back. The doctor entered with a grim look on his face. "Please calm down," he said softly. "He survived, but there's something you need to know." Clara covered her mouth. The doctor sighed and continued. "We've done all we can. He will live, but he won't walk again. The accident crushed his spine. He's crippled for life." Clara screamed and dropped to the floor. Rose fainted on the spot. It was very chaotic. The second blow. 2 days later, I was still in the hospital, pretending to be unconscious while listening to everything around me. Clara stayed beside the bed, wiping my fake tears with a towel. Rose paced around the room like a restless ghost. Then something happened. One of my employees, Daniel, who was part of the plan, came rushing into the room. Sir, he said breathlessly, eyes full of fake panic. Please, I don't know who else to call. Clara stood up. What's going on? She asked. Daniel shook his head. The company, it's gone. The government is investigating for fraud and money laundering. They've frozen the accounts. They've seized the buildings. Sir David is no longer the majority shareholder. They pushed him out. Everything is gone. The silence was loud. Clara blinked rapidly. Rose clutched her chest. What? What did you say? Daniel dropped to his knees. They are saying all his assets are under review. The cars, the houses, the bank accounts. They are all under government control. Clara's legs buckled and she hit the floor. No, that's not possible. Rose began to cry. Jesus, what kind of curse is this? The nurses came running again. Clara was shaking and Rose was gasping for air. And me, I was still lying in the bed, eyes shut, heart quietly listening. Now I have seen what I needed to see. Their reaction to losing wealth was louder than their concern for my health. And that was all the answer I needed. The real test began after 2 weeks. I was discharged from the hospital. A wheelchair was given to me. The doctor reminded them again, he will never walk again. We have to support him now. We got into a hired taxi and the journey was silent. Clara and her mother didn't say a word. When we arrived at my mansion, government tape was across the gate and armed officers stood guard. Clara gasped. We can't get in. I told you, I whispered weakly. They've taken everything. Rose rubbed her temples. We can't sleep on the road. Let's go to my house. And so, the mighty David Lawson, once a king in his own world, rode between his wife and her mother to a tiny 2-bedroom bungalow in the heart of the city. The paint was fading. The walls had cracks. There were no security, no driver, no luxury. The air was different, hot, heavy and full of tension. Rose looked at my wheelchair and frowned. This chair is too big. You are blocking the door. Clara walked past me like I was invisible. I rolled myself into the house alone. That night, they didn't bring me dinner. I waited and waited until my stomach ached. I finally went to the kitchen and found empty pots. Didn't you cook? I asked weakly. Rose snapped from the sitting room. Do we look like your chefs? This is not your mansion. Clara said coldly, if you want food, make it yourself. I'm not your maid. My heart cracked. The real test had begun. And so the suffering continued. The next few weeks were worse than I imagined. I wasn't allowed to watch TV because Rose said I was wasting electricity. They stopped giving me food. Sometimes I had to beg. Other times they locked the kitchen and left me starving. I would cry quietly at night while they laughed in the living room. Look at him now. Big man has become useless. To survive, I got a job as a sanitation worker. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., I wheeled myself to the street, wore the bright orange uniform and cleaned gutters and roads. People looked at me with pity. Some gave me coins, most just ignored me. Each evening when I returned from work sweaty and hungry, Rose would collect whatever money I made. Give me the money, she would say, arms stretched out. This house isn't free. And I gave it to her every day. But the worst came one Saturday. I got home earlier than usual. I was starving. I rolled into the kitchen and saw a bowl of soup with fried chicken. My hands shook as I reached for it. I sat and began to eat slowly, tears falling from my cheeks from the taste of real food. But before I could swallow my second spoon, Rose stormed in. What do you think you're doing? She shouted, and I froze. I said, what are you eating? That's not for you, you crippled fool. Clara ran in too. He ate her food? Can you imagine? You dare touch her soup? Rose walked up to me, snatched the bowl and poured the hot soup on my head. Clara laughed. Now you know your place." I sat there, soup dripping from my face, chicken on the floor, and my heart shattered into pieces. But what they didn't know was that I had a hidden camera in my wheelchair and everything was being recorded. Every single act was being recorded by the hidden camera in my wheelchair. As the hot soup ran down my face, it burned my skin and broke what was left of my pride. Pieces of fried chicken lay on the floor. Clara stood with her arms crossed, looking angry. Rose was laughing loudly. Her laughter felt like a slap to my soul. "You think this is your palace?" Rose asked with a smirk on her face. "You should be happy we let you stay here. If I had my way, you'd be sleeping on the streets." I didn't reply. My hands shook, not from the soup, but from the pain in my heart. The woman I once loved, the one I once called my queen, had become a stranger. Her mother, Rose, was even worse. I slowly rolled myself into the small bedroom they gave me. There was no fan, no bed frame, just an old thin mattress on the floor and a cracked window. I didn't cry. Not this time. I had cried enough. Instead, I took out the small memory card from a secret place under my wheelchair. I put it in a pouch I had sewn into my clothes. I was recording everything. Every slap, every insult, and every moment I went to bed hungry. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it for justice. The next morning, I woke up shaking. Rain had come in through the window and soaked my blankets. My back hurt from sleeping on the hard floor. My stomach growled, but I didn't dare ask for food. By 4 a.m., I was already out in the cold, dressed in my orange sanitation uniform. I wheeled myself down the dark street with my broom tied to the sides. The street lights above me flickered like they were tired too. People stared, some whispered, a few laughed. "Isn't that the man who owned that big house in Lekki? I heard his wife now feeds him leftovers if he's lucky." I didn't say a word. I swept the street in silence. I knew I had my plans, but I just needed time. Later that day, I returned home tired and soaked in sweat. My hands were sore, my lips were dry, and as I wheeled through the gate, Rose was waiting for me. "You are late," she said. "We've already eaten." I didn't argue. I didn't ask for food. I just rolled past her. Then Clara stepped outside. "Where is the money from today?" she asked, stretching her hand like a debt collector. I gave her the small envelope of money I had earned. She opened it, counted it, and looked at me with disgust. "This is all? For someone who leaves the house every day, you earn like a useless rat." She walked away. That night, I went to bed without food again. The insults and wickedness became normal. Sometimes they would hide my wheelchair so I'd have to crawl to the bathroom. Other times they would mix pepper into my water and laughed while I coughed. One day, Rose invited her friends over. She made me serve them drinks like a servant. When I dropped a glass, they laughed and called me Oga Crepo. Clara just sat and watched me with no emotion. At night, I would wake up in pain. My stomach would hurt from hunger. I would cry silently so no one would hear me, but the camera kept recording. I saved the videos every day. I sent them to Frank, my loyal friend. He wanted to expose them already, but I told him to wait. "Not yet," I said, in a quiet tone over a secret phone call. "Let the world see it all first." One Sunday, things got worse. Clara walked in with a shopping bag. "Who bought that?" Rose asked. "I did. I used this ID card to open a credit account as a small shop." "You used this ID?" Rose shouted. "Yes now. What's the big deal? He's useless now. I even signed the debt in his name. If they don't get their money, they will arrest him, not us." They both laughed. I was standing quietly behind the kitchen door. My heart turned cold. They weren't just abusing me anymore. They were setting me up to be arrested. I quietly rolled back into my room. A few days later, I collapsed at work. My body had had enough. I hadn't eaten well in days. A kind man took me to a small clinic. The nurse gave me glucose and told me to rest. But I couldn't rest, because if I stayed home, I wouldn't eat, so I went back to work the next day. When I came home that evening, something felt strange. There was a man sitting in the living room. He looked rich and confident. "This is Mr. Benson," Clara said. "He's a friend, a real man." Rose added, "Yes, unlike you, he can walk." I forced a smile. I greeted him. He barely looked at me. That night, Clara didn't come to our room. She stayed up laughing with Mr. Benson. I turned my face to the wall. My hands were shaking with quiet anger. The next morning, I rolled out early and called Frank. "Get everything ready," I said. Frank paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "It's time." And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not because I was free, but because the end of their wickedness was finally near. That morning, I decided to end my silence. I didn't look like a man ready for revenge. I still wore the same faded orange sanitation uniform. My wheelchair still squeaked as I rolled it across the rough pavement. My face still carried the tiredness of someone who hadn't slept on a real bed in weeks. But something had changed inside me. I was done being the silent victim. Frank had already done everything I asked. For weeks, he had quietly gathered every video I sent him from the wheelchair camera, organizing them, time-stamping them, making sure the audio was clean. I had told him to be patient, to let Clara and Rose fall so deep into the trap that when the truth came out, it would destroy the very throne they built on my pain. And now, they were close to the edge. That evening, when I returned from work, the lights were off. Not from a power outage, but because Rose didn't want to pay the electricity bill. She said it was my problem. "Go and generate light with your crippled hands," she had once hissed. I rolled in quietly, hungry and soaked in rainwater. I noticed something unusual. The front door was slightly opened, and from inside I heard laughter, intimate laughter. I pushed the door and saw Clara on the couch. In her lap was Mr. Benson. His shoes were off, shirt unbuttoned. My heart paused. "Wait," Benson said, chewing. "What if your husband rolls in on his wheelchair?" Clara laughed. "Let him roll. Who cares? He should be lucky we haven't even sent him out yet." The both laughed like it was a joke. Behind them, Rose walked out from the hallway, saw me and said coldly, "You're back. Drop your broom outside, I beg. The living room is not your office." Clara looked up and saw me. "Oh, it's you," she said, wiping her hand like she had touched dirt. Benson stood up and walked past me. He didn't say a word. I wheeled myself into the bedroom without speaking, but I wasn't hot anymore. I was calm, too calm, because I knew what was coming next. The very next morning, I left early, not to sweep, but to meet Frank. He had rented a private lounge in a nearby hotel. Inside, 3 large screens displayed my life over the past few months. From the first day I entered the small house to the moment the soup was poured on my head, every insult, every slap, every wicked smile. I nodded. Perfect. Now, let's invite the guests. Frank raised an eyebrow. "You are sure?" "Send it," I said. Let them walk straight into the fire. He hit a button on his laptop. Emails and messages were sent out to the media, to close business partners, to old friends, and most importantly, to my lawyer and private investigator. But I wasn't done. I needed to add a final piece to the puzzle, I said. That evening, I returned home and pretended to be even weaker. I acted like my body couldn't move properly and wheezed with every breath. Clara ignored me and her mother scolded. "What kind of deadweight is this? You're even worse than before, just rotting in our house." I looked down, holding back a grin. Clara suddenly said, "You know what? I've had enough. I'm going to Benson's place. He just got a new car." Her mother didn't stop her. Instead, she whispered something I'll never forget. "Don't come back home tonight. Let this one sleep in his own stench." Clara smiled and left. I waited a few hours. Then I took a small envelope from my inner pocket, wheeled into the kitchen and handed it to Rose. "What's this?" she snapped. "Small cash," I said. "From a friend. Just help me buy rice." Her eyes lit up. "How much?" "Just count it." She opened it. Inside was a bundle of cash. Real, fresh bills. Enough to make her forget all her senses. "Wait, your friend gave you this?" "Yes," I nodded. He said he felt sorry for me. She smiled. It was the first time I had seen her face since I arrived. "Well, At least someone still sees you as human, she muttered. I watched her stuff the cash inside her bra and walk out. As soon as she left, I grabbed my burner phone. Frank, it's time. The next morning, the entire city was talking. The news headlines read, shocking secret footage. Billionaire David Lawson faked disability to test wife's love. Domestic abuse, humiliation and betrayal caught on hidden camera. Wife caught cheating while husband pretended to be crippled. The story exploded. Frank had sent the footage to every major platform. A well-edited documentary version was already airing online with commentary, interviews from former workers, and side-by-side footage of the mansion days versus the slum life I endured. Social media was on fire. Justice served. That woman and her mother are devils. How can you do that to your own husband? The comment section was on fire. And that wasn't even the best part. Around 2 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Rose opened it only to find 3 plainclothes officers standing there. Good afternoon, one said. We have a warrant to seize and search this property related to fraud and identity theft. Are you Mrs. Rose? She froze. Yes. Why? The officer showed her a photo of Clara holding a shopping bag. This woman used a stolen ID to commit financial fraud, which traced the registration to this address. Before she could speak, Clara walked in through the gate, stunned by the crowd gathering around the house. What's going on? She asked. You're under arrest, the officer said, stepping forward. Me? For what? For stealing your husband's identity to open illegal credit accounts. We also have footage of you mocking and physically abusing a disabled man. That is felony harassment. What? Who said that? Where is the evidence? I rolled out slowly from the hallway. I did. Clara's jaw dropped. Rose stumbled backward. No, you are not crippled. I stood up from the wheelchair, slowly stretching my legs. I hadn't walked in public in months. You lied to us, this boy! Rose screamed. No, I said calmly. I tested you and you failed. Clara stared at me in disbelief. Her mouth was trembling and her voice was barely a whisper. You can walk. I stood there, tall and steady, for the first time in front of her in months. The air around us felt heavy with shock. The entire compound was silent. Neighbors had gathered and the officers had paused. I can walk, I said, and I can see clearly now too. Clara's eyes darted from my face to the uniformed officers, then to the camera crews standing just behind them. Yes, Frank had invited the press. You set us up, Rose shrieked. You tricked us. No, I replied calmly. You exposed yourselves. I only gave you the stage. The police officers read Clara her rights. She resisted, screaming that she was innocent, that I was lying and that it was all fake. But the footage said otherwise. It was already everywhere. TV, social media, even WhatsApp groups. Every slap, every insult, every time she and her mother make me crawl for food like a dog. Please, I'm your wife, don't do this, she cried, trying to grab my arm. I pulled my hand away. You were never my wife, Clara. You were a tenant in my life and your rent expired the day I lost everything. They took her away in cuffs. The crowd outside clapped and some even cursed her, but I wasn't done. 2 days later, I held a press conference. This time I didn't wear a disguise. I wore a black suit, clean shave, and a face filled with calm power. The hall was packed with reporters and cameras. I want to thank the people of Nigeria, I began, for standing with me, believing the truth and sharing the story. I paused, then I added, but I'm not here to speak about betrayal alone. I'm here to speak for every man or woman who has been mocked for being down, for every house help insulted for being poor, every spouse treated like trash when they could no longer provide. The room was silent and a few people were already in tears. I was blessed with wealth, I said, but cursed with a wife who only saw me as a bank account, a mother-in-law who saw my kindness as weakness. So I tested them and they failed. But the real victory is not in what I've regained, it's in what they lost. The reporters applauded and the story made headlines around the world. Legally, I pressed charges for identity theft, domestic abuse and emotional cruelty. Clara faced 5 years in prison. Rose faced 2 years. My lawyer made sure they would never touch my money or assets again. Every property document, every account, and every trust fund was sealed with new security measures. But I didn't stop there. I started a foundation, the Dignity Project. Its mission was to protect housemaids, domestic workers, and vulnerable spouses from emotional and physical abuse. We created emergency hotlines, free legal aids, rescue rooms, and awareness campaigns. 1 year later, Clara was granted supervised parole to participate in a court-mandated counseling and community service. I personally requested for them to assign her to a women's shelter where she would cook and clean for other women recovering from abuse. Rose, after serving time, returned to her village, her pride shattered and her mouth silenced. The same woman who once mocked my disability now limped from arthritis and walked with a cane. One day, I visited her local work area. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I walked in and saw Clara in an apron sweeping the floor. Her face was stained and her hands pale. Her hair was no longer done in Brazilian curls, but wrapped in a faded scarf. She looked up and our eyes met. She dropped her broom. "You," she whispered. I looked at her for a moment. There was no anger left in me, only peace. "I hope you've learned something," I said. She nodded slowly, her eyes red. "I was blind. I was wrong. I'm sorry." "I know," I replied softly, "but some lessons are meant to be earned, not just spoken." I turned around and walked away. Now I live quietly in a peaceful estate, surrounded by real people. I don't throw parties anymore, and I don't care for designer watches or champagne pools. I wake up each morning, pray, cook my own food, and run my businesses from home. I'm dating again. Her name is Lydia. She runs a small orphanage and doesn't wear makeup too much. The first time I met her, she offered me water in a plastic cup and asked me how I was feeling, not what I owned. And that was enough for me to know I had found gold in the dirt. The moral lesson from David's story is that wealth reveals character, both yours and theirs. Don't confuse love for loyalty when money is involved. Power abused is always power lost. The way someone treats you when you are down is the way they feel truly about you. When people show you their true colors, believe them the first time. Never be afraid to walk away from disrespect, even if you are in a wheelchair. Thank you for watching this story. Please share your thoughts on what you've learned from this story in the comment section. Don't forget to like and share with your loved ones. Until I bring you another wonderful story, stay tuned. They say a mother's love is the first miracle a child experiences, but mine felt like a curse. My name is Obina. I was born on a cold Harmattan morning in a dusty village in Ebonyi State. From the moment I arrived in this world, my mother looked at me not with joy, but with something darker, disgust, maybe even hatred. People say she wept the day I was born, not because she was overwhelmed with love, but because I was the one she swore she never wanted. I was the accident she never forgave herself for. Growing up, my earliest memories weren't of lullabies or warm embraces. They were of shouts, being dragged by the ear for things I didn't do, of cold nights on the kitchen floor when my brothers slept in beds. I would wake up to the smell of stew, only to be handed plain garri and sent away, while others ate meat and rice. When I asked why, she would say, "Garri fits your type, bastards don't deserve meat." I didn't understand it at first. I tried to be good. I swept the compound before dawn. I fetched water. I scrubbed the toilets. I even looked after my younger siblings. But nothing I did ever pleased her. She never called me Obina, not once. She called me that boy. Even when she introduced me to people, it was always this one. He's just there. My father, a drunk, who spent more time at the palm wine joint than at home, barely noticed me. And when he did, it was either to lash at me with his belt or accuse me of being the reason why his wife no longer smiled. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was school. I wore torn uniforms, stitched more times than I could count. My sandals had holes. My socks were mismatched. The other kids called me Obina the beggar. They threw chalk at me, hid my books, mocked me during assembly. I sat alone during lunch. No one wanted to sit with the boy who smelled like kerosene and palm kernel oil. I got used to it. I became quiet and invisible. One day, during morning assembly, Chisom the class clown pulled my shorts down in front of everyone. Laughter roared like thunder. Even the teachers laughed. I stood frozen. My boxers torn and faded. My dignity crumbling like dry clay. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply picked up my shorts, wore them and walked away from the assembly straight home. That was the day my mother beat me so hard I couldn't walk for 2 days. "You want to disgrace me? You are leaving school?" she screamed. "You think you are special? You are nothing but a burden, a cursed child." That night, I decided something. If the world saw me as nothing, I would become something so big they would have no choice but to remember me. And that decision became the flame that kept me alive. There was only one person who ever showed me kindness. An old blind man named Panayo. He ran a roadside bookstore near my school. No one really bought his books, so he spent his days listening to the radio and talking to himself. One afternoon, I helped him pick up a stock of books after some boys kicked over his display. He touched my hand and said, "You are not like the others. I can't see your face, but your voice carries fire." From that day, I visited him every week. He let me borrow books, real books, not the torn textbooks from school. He gave me novels, science magazines, and newspapers. I would read to him, and in return, he taught me how to question the world. "Knowledge is power, Obinna," he would say, "and power is the best revenge." When I turned 12, something happened that changed my life forever. My mother accused me of stealing 1,000 naira from Harappa. I didn't even know where she kept money, but her mind was made up. She dragged me outside, beat me with a broomstick in front of neighbors, and screamed, "Thief! You will end up in jail like your uncle." I bled that day. My lips cracked, my legs swelled. No one intervened, not even my father. He watched, sipping palm wine like he was at a show. That night, I packed my only pair of jeans, my books from Pa Anayo, and a half-eaten loaf of bread, and I left. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked through the forest paths, past sleeping homes and distant houses. I cried once, only once, then I swallowed my pain. I arrived in Enugu City 3 days later, hungry, barefoot, and sick. That was the beginning of my second life. I slept under bridges. I worked as a conductor. Later, I worked at a car wash. I was slapped, cheated, insulted, but I never stole, and I never begged. I used every naira I earned to buy food and pay to use the internet cafe near the bus park. The owner, Mr. Emmanuel, noticed me one day when I corrected a customer struggling with an online form. "You sabi computer?" he asked. I nodded and replied, "Small." He gave me a weekend job, clean the place, and in return, get 30 minutes of computer time every day, and that was all I needed. I learned fast, faster than anyone expected. I devoured tutorials, learned how to build websites, watched coding videos, slept in the cafe sometimes. Mr. Emmanuel eventually gave me a mattress in the storeroom. Years passed. By 19, I had created a simple mobile app that helped traders track goods across rural markets. I pitched it at a local tent event. People laughed at first until I showed them how it worked. That week, I got my first investor. By 23, I was in Lagos, sitting across from international tech giants. By 25, I made Forbes Africa's cover as the youngest self-made billionaire in the West Africa. Now let me tell you how fate plays its games. One evening, while preparing for a keynote speech, a video surfaced online. A poor woman from a village in Ebonyi was recorded wailing on local TV that her son, now a billionaire, hadn't come home or sent a dime. It was my mother. She sat on a broken plastic chair, fake tears in her eyes, saying, "I raised him with all my sweat. I suffered for him. Now he has forgotten me." She had no idea the video would go viral, and she had no idea I had seen it. But I didn't call, I didn't reply. I simply watched in silence with no emotion. Because what do you do when the woman who caused your birth now cries for your blessings? I sat in silence, the video still playing on my screen. My assistant had forwarded it to me without saying a word. She knew. There she was, my mother, the same woman who once beat me till I bled, who cursed the day I was born, now sitting on a faded Ankara blouse, crying fake tears before the local news screen. Her voice cracked as she sniffed dramatically. I haven't eaten for days. My only son, Obinna, he has abandoned me. I raised him with nothing, gave him everything. Now you won't even pick my calls. Those were all lies, because I never received a single call. Does she even have my number? She wiped her nose with the edge of her wrapper, then stared directly into the camera with her voice trembling. Obinna, my son, if you see this, please come back home. Your mother needs you. My stomach turned, my lips parted, but no words came out, just air and disbelief. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because some part of me, a small stupid part, still ached for a version of her that never existed. A version that would have held me close and said, my son, I see you. But that version was a dream I killed long ago. Still, something in me stirred. Schedule a trip, I told Chioma, my assistant, the next morning. To Abuja, she asked. I looked up from my coffee and said to her, no, to Ebony, back home. She paused. Your mother's village? Yes. But Obinna, with all due respect, are you sure that's a good idea? No, I said quietly, but it's necessary. The news spread like wildfire within hours. Obinna Okafor returns to his village after 13 years of silence. From bridge boy to billionaire, he's going home. Village on fire as Africa's youngest tech tycoon plans a surprise visit. Those were the headlines that morning. Everyone wanted to come. Journalists, NGOs, even politicians. But I told them no, that this was personal. We arrived quietly at dawn. My convoy drove past the village square. The air smelled of red dust and burning firewood. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the village was already buzzing because words travel fast in places like this. Children ran barefoot through the narrow streets, chasing the headlights. Women paused from fetching water to whisper and point. I stepped out of my car in a plain white shirt, jeans and sandals. No gold chain, no suit, no bodyguards, just me. And yet, I had never felt more powerful. My mother's compound hadn't changed. The zinc roof still leaked in the corners. The walls were stained with age, the paint peeling off like old scabs. I paused by the gate and breathed deeply. Then I knocked. It was my younger brother Chinedu who opened the door. He froze when he saw me. Obinna. He looked older, tired, worn out, but still recognizable. The last time we spoke, Chinedu had thrown sand in my face and laughed at me when our mother almost beat me to death. Now his lips quivered. You came? I nodded. Where is Mama? He pointed inside, almost too afraid to speak. She was sitting in her usual spot, the plastic chair by the corner of the hut, still in the same wrapper from the video. This time with a scarf tied tightly around her head. She was chewing on garden eggs, talking loudly to no one in particular. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and for a moment, just a flicker, there was something like shame. Then she rose quickly, pretending to limp, and rushed towards me. Obinna, my son, my golden boy, you came. I didn't move. She hugged me, and her grip was strong and desperate. My God has done it. My prayers worked. You came back to me. I stood stiff as a statue. When she let go, I looked her in the eye and said, you called me a curse. Her smile faded. You beat me, you starved me and left me to rot. Do you remember, or should I remind you? She was silent. I was 12, I continued. You dragged me outside and beat me with broomsticks while the neighbors watched. You said I'll end up in prison like Uncle Carlo, that I was born to suffer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. So tell me, Mama, Why now? Why are you crying for me on television when you buried me alive long before I left? She looked around nervously. Neighbors were gathering and watching, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. I was confused, Obinna. Life was hard. Your father, he didn't help. I was young and... You hated me, I said, cutting her off. You hated me, and that's the truth. Her tears came quickly, but they didn't move me. I'm sorry, she whispered. No, I said firmly. You are sorry because I'm successful. If I had died in the city, you would have said it was a curse that followed me. But now I'm rich. I'm suddenly your golden boy. She knelt suddenly, right there in the red sand. The crowd gasped. Forgive me, Obinna. I was blind. I didn't know you'd become this. I didn't know. I looked down at her, my heart like stone. Then I turned and walked away. That night, I booked every student in the village primary and secondary school a scholarship. I donated brand new laptops, sponsored clean water projects, and promised to build a modern learning center that would be named after the only man who saw my words, Pa Anayo. I didn't mention my mother, not even once. She stood at the edge of the crowd during the event, her face tight, surrounded by people whispering. Some pitied her, others mocked her, but me, I felt nothing. Until later that night, when a little boy tapped me on the arm. He looked around 10, skinny and with dusty feet, torn shirts, and he stared at me with wide eyes. Are you really Obinna? I smiled. Yes, I am. He grinned shyly. My mama said I should learn to be like you, that no matter how people treat me, I should never stop believing in myself. I froze, then slowly knelt beside him. What do you believe? He looked at the stars and replied, I believe I can become president one day. I ruffled his hair gently, with my eyes stinging. You will. Just promise me one thing. What? Never let their hate become your truth. He nodded. And right there, for the first time in years, I felt peace. But it wouldn't last long. Because the next morning, a scandal would break that would shake everything. A secret about my past that someone was trying to use against me. And guess who leaked it? The next morning started like a dream. I woke up to the sound of bird song and distant church bells, still reeling from the overwhelming crowd at the scholarship ceremony the night before. The headlines were already rolling in. Obinna Okafor uplifts his village with $2 million education fund. From abandoned child to national hero, Obinna gives hope. Child to national hero, Obinna gives hope. Mother breaks down in tears as billionaire son returns. The media has painted her as a suffering, regretful mother of a once forgotten son, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't feel the bells on my back or hear the names she called me when no one was watching. I sipped my tea slowly, staring out of the window of a small lodge I had rented nearby. My assistant, Chioma, knocked and entered with a concerned look on her face. You might want to sit down for this. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? She handed me her tablet, already loaded with a video link. This was just posted on a gossip blog and it is spreading fast, she said. I clicked play. There she was again, my mother. But this time, not crying and not begging. This time, she was smiling, seated in someone's backyard with a woman I didn't recognize holding a camera, and she was talking loudly and casually. He wasn't even my husband's child, she said, laughing. I always knew. The moment he was born with that nose, I knew he wasn't from my husband's blood. That's why I hated him. He reminded me of the mistake I made. The camera woman gasped. Are you saying Obinna is not your husband's son? My mother laughed again. He was from a man I met before marriage. I was young and foolish. I never told anyone, not even Obinna. But he thinks he's a big man. If he knew the truth, maybe he would stop acting like he owns the world. My vision blurred. My hand froze around the cup. A slow, painful tightness wrapped itself around my chest. Choma's voice came from far away, muffled by the ringing in my ears. My mother sold the recordings to 3 blogs. One of them claimed she asked for $10 million naira to keep it quiet. I stared at the screen as my mother kept talking nonchalantly, as if she were discussing the weather, dismissing my existence like I was an unwanted stain on her memory. She never told me, I whispered. I don't think anyone knew, Chioma said gently. Your father raised you, but biologically, she claims you are someone else's child. I laughed, not out of humor, but from the absurdity of it all. So after everything, after the beatings, the hate, the years of abandonment, now she's trying to erase me completely. She couldn't destroy me in childhood, I said. Now she wants to ruin me as a man. The video had already racked up hundreds and thousands of views. The comments were brutal. Some people sympathized. Others accused me of being an illegitimate child trying to act righteous. The media was asking questions and investors were calling. She's selling this story like it's a joke, I said to myself. Chioma placed a hand on my shoulder. What do you want to do? I paused. This wasn't about me anymore. I had become a symbol, a mirror for children across Africa who were abandoned, rejected, cast aside. If I folded now, I would become another tragedy they would add to the statistics. No, I had come too far. Schedule a press conference, I said. Tomorrow. Chioma nodded. What will you say? I looked her straight in the eyes and I replied, the truth, all of it. The next day, the media gathered under a large white tent in the village. Satellite vans lined the road. Cameramen buzzed like flies. Reporters clutched their notepads tightly, eyes sharp with hunger for a headline. I stepped onto the podium with a simple black shirt. No fanfare, no security. Just me and a story that was finally mine to tell. I scanned the crowd and there she was. My mother, hiding beneath a gele that failed to cover her shame, seated far at the back. I locked eyes with her once and she quickly looked away. I took a deep breath. My name is Obinna Okafor, I began, and for most of my childhood, I believed I was cursed. The crowd leaned in. I was raised by a woman who made it clear every day that I was unwanted. I was beaten, starved, mocked and humiliated, not by strangers, but by my own mother. The same woman who is now calling herself the mother of a billionaire. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I slept under bridges. I was called the beggar. I was bullied for my clothes, my smell, my silence. But I rose, not because anyone lifted me, but because I refused to stay buried. I taught myself coding in a cyber cafe while washing cars during the day. I built my life from nothing. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. And now, after all these years, the same woman who called me a mistake has decided to sell my story, to label me a bastard and say I never belonged. Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't know who my biological father is. But let me tell you what I do know. I looked straight into the camera and said, I know pain. I know rejection. I know what it means to sleep hungry while your brothers eat. I know the fire it takes to rise from nothing and become something the world can't ignore. Thunderous applause erupted. Some reporters had tears in their eyes. My mother sat frozen, with shame on her face. I'm not ashamed of where I come from, I continued, because my story is no longer just my story. It belongs to every child who was ever told they were a mistake. I stepped down and the crowd surged with emotion. People stood up and clapped. Some hugged each other. A few women wailed softly, and I walked past my mother without saying a word. That night, I sat alone on the balcony of the lodge. Chioma brought me a bottle of water and sat beside me. You broke the internet, she said with a small smile. You are trending in 4 countries, and the donations are pouring in for your new school project. I nodded slowly and I said, it's not about the fame, Chioma. It's about finally being free. She looked at me and asked, do you feel free? I thought about it. About the boy who sat in the corner of the class with torn sandals. About the child who once flinched at every raised voice. About the boy who believed he was never good enough. Then I looked at the man I had become. Yes, I said. For the first time in my life, I feel free. She smiled and stood up to leave. Just as she reached the door, I spoke again. Have you ever wondered why some mothers can love one child and hate another? She paused and said, I have. What if she hated me because she saw a part of herself she couldn't forgive? Choma turned slowly and said, what part? The part that dared to dream beyond her own pain, I replied. But even as I embraced my newfound freedom, life wasn't done with me yet. Because 2 weeks later, a man showed up at my Lagos office, a stranger, middle-aged, tall and nervous-looking man, and he carried a letter. My name is Dominic, he said, and I believe I might be your father. I had just returned from a speaking event in Ghana when Chioma met me at the airport with a pale face and a letter in her hand. There's someone waiting at the office, she said carefully. He claims he might be your father. For a moment, time stood still. I'd buried that question a long time ago. I'd buried it beneath survival, success and every scar my childhood had carved into my memory. Who my real father was didn't matter. I had become my own man. But standing at the airport gate, holding that letter in my hand, the ache returned. That ache of never knowing where you came from. I arrived at the office late in the evening. The lights were dimmed and everyone had gone home, except for the man sitting silently in the waiting lounge. Tall, salt and pepper hair, weathered skin and eyes that carried a guilt I recognized too well. Obinna, he said, standing. I didn't speak. I simply looked at him, my arm crossed, my heart racing like a child who just peeked behind a forbidden door. I'm Dominic, he said softly. Your mother, Ugochi, she and I were together before she met your father. We were young, stupid, in love, but my parents refused. She left, and I didn't even know she was pregnant. I clenched my jaw. Why now? He reached into his pocket and handed me a photograph. It was old, faded. 2 young people in their late teens smiling at the camera. And then another of him holding a newborn, maybe a few months old. The resemblance was there. Sharp cheekbones, that stubborn jawline. I found out last month, he continued. A relative from your village recognized your mother's name in one of your interviews. When I saw your face on TV, I knew it was you. I sat down slowly. She never told me, I muttered. She punished me my entire life for a choice I never made. He nodded, his eyes filled with pain. She hated herself, Obinna, and she took it out on you. I looked at him, fighting the burn in my throat. Do you know what it's like to be unwanted? To be beaten like a dog? To be told you are a reason why someone's life is cursed? He shook his head and replied, No, I don't, but I wish I could take your pain. I stood up and said to him, You can't. The pain is what made me who I am, and for that, I'm no longer ashamed. He looked at me with his voice trembling and said, I have a wife now, and children. I don't want to replace anything. I just wanted to know my son. The word son hit like a thunderclap on my chest, not because it was unfamiliar, but because I'd never had it spoken with such softness. I nodded slowly. We'll see where this goes, one step at a time. A month passed. I didn't speak to my mother. She didn't try to reach out to me either. Perhaps shame had finally built a prison strong enough to keep her inside, but I couldn't ignore the pull. So one humid Saturday, I returned to the village, alone. No press, no assistant, just me. Her compound was quieter than before, weeds growing at the edges. The zinc roof was rusting again. I knocked and she answered. Her face was thinner. Her eyes were sunken and she didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. I heard, she said, moving aside to let me in. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with unspoken history. Then she broke it. I watched your speech. I deserved every word. I didn't reply. I was angry. she said softly. Not at you, at myself, because I made a mistake. I was ashamed, and when you were born, you reminded me of that mistake every day. I clenched my fist. So you punished me as a child for your regrets? Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued. I was young, Obina, poor and scared. And when your father, Emeka, found out that you were not his child, he told me to never speak of it. I was trapped, and I hated you because you were the truth I couldn't hide. You let me suffer, I said. You watched me bleed and you said nothing. I know, she sobbed, and I will live with that for the rest of my life. I stood up ready to walk away, but her voice caught me mid-step. I kept something, she said. I don't know why. Maybe guilt, maybe hope. She walked to the corner and pulled out a small, rusted tin box. Inside were drawings, my childhood sketches, school results, and the first award I ever won, and a tiny torn notebook where I had once written, "One day I'll be more than what they see." I stared at the words, my handwriting, my hope. She wiped her face and said, I kept every piece of you I didn't deserve. For a moment, the child in me stared, not for revenge, not for justice, but for closure. I don't hate you, I said quietly, but I can't love you either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'll never be you, and that is enough. 6 months later, I stood in front of a crowd of 1,000 at the grand opening of the Anayo Center for Orphaned and Abandoned Children, named after the only man who ever saw what's in me when the world didn't. Dominic, my real father, was in the front row beside his wife. We weren't perfect, but we were trying. Choma stood at my side, holding back tears as I cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed and children cheered, and somewhere in the back of the crowd, I saw her, my mother, standing alone, hands clapped, silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel rage, I felt release. Today, I speak to children across Africa, children who sleep under bridges, who are told their curses, who are beaten, silenced, and forgotten. I tell them, they threw me away like trash. Now the world knows my name. This story teaches us that pain can build empires and rejection can raise kings. You don't need their love to succeed. You don't need their approval to matter. What you need is fire in your soul and the courage to rise. Even if your own mother calls you a curse, your future can still call you a blessing. Never forget, the same people who buried you alive might one day watch you bloom on every screen. Because I was once the boy they threw away, and now I'm the man they can never forget.